Great. Thank you. So I'm Lori Kaplan. I'm a senior project manager at ProQuest, and I am involved in a number of different standards organizations on a number of different committees. One of the committees is the ICEDIS section of Editor, where I'm a co-chair. And for the ISO 8 revision, I am the convener of that group. I'm also on the PIJ standing committee as well. So where am I? There we go. So today I am going to talk about Editor and ICEDIS, as well as two of the other parts of Editor that I'm not as involved in, but Tim Davenport was unable to be here today, so I said I would pinch hit for him. And then also to talk about a little bit more about ISO and the particular committee that I am involved with. So what is Editor? For those of you who don't know or aren't familiar with them, they are, and this I took right from their website, they're a trade standards body for the global book, ebook, and serial supply chain. They actually have 110 members, and they're in from 25 countries around the world, and I believe there's actually a 111th from a 26th country who at least expressed interest at their last meeting and may be joining shortly. So they've been around since 1991, and in 1994 actually became a recognized standards organization. Some of the things they focus on mostly are Onyx standards for delivering metadata for books and for serials, e-commerce and identifiers, as well as working with FEMA, which Todd referenced earlier. And so because they're working with standards, they recognize that just promoting the standard is not enough. So they also work on compliance as well as trying to keep the standards up to date. And they do that by delivering the documentation as well as training materials and other information on their website free of charge, which is really very nice. So if you want to read any of these, see if they're applicable to what you're working on or something that one of your suppliers might be working with, you can actually just go to their website and find out that information. As far as, excuse me, ICEDIS is concerned, they are a subgroup of Editor focused mainly on data exchange for serials. And so they're basically considered a special interest group, and they work mostly with publishers, providers of services to serials groups, as well as subscription agents and other delivery mechanisms. And because it's a subgroup, anyone who is a member of Editor can become involved in ICEDIS if that makes sense for their organization. So Onyx for serials is part of the ICEDIS work. In fact, the main part of the ICEDIS work. For those of you who are involved with Onyx for books, which I think of as a really nice set of metadata standards, all nicely packaged in one neat delivery system, Onyx for serials is not so easy. Years ago, I was on the Onyx for serials working group where we thought we could create, similarly to the books, one nice, neat standard. It did not exactly work out that way. because there were way too many differences and iterations and exceptions, and for every single line you had 27 other things you needed to consider. So what they wound up doing is breaking Onyx for Serials into smaller, manageable pieces. Today, if you say Onyx for Serials, it's basically those last 3 items. So the SPS, SOH, and SRN, which really deal with Serials holdings and resources and the different products and subscriptions. The 2 at the top are more specialized. So Onyx PC started out mostly as an exchange mechanism for subscription agents. And the Onyx PH was more for link resolvers because it dealt with holdings. As far as Onyx PC is concerned, that has been the main focus of the ICETUS group for the last probably 2 years. As it was initially just a pricing message, it does handle all different types of journal and serials delivery. So a single journal, multiple journals in a package, even packages that contain multiple types of content. And you can see there are several organizations working with the Onyx PC message, but unfortunately it's a rather small select group. And you'll see on the next slide, one of the things we're trying to do is market that to a wider audience. So the ICETUS group meets 3 times a year. Once at the Frankfurt Book Fair meeting, and usually the European co-chair, who right now is Henning Schoenberger from Springer, attends that meeting. Then there's a meeting at actually the UKSG meeting comes first, based on the calendar. And that meeting, both the US and the European co-chair tried to attend. This year we both did. And then the 3rd meeting follows very quickly after the Frankfurt meeting at the Charleston conference, and usually just the US representative is there. And so the last meeting, of course, was UKSG. And there, the group talked about a number of items that they want to or feel like they need to tackle. One, short-term enhancement is working with some of the EU tax regulations, which they thought they could somewhat easily incorporate into the standard, as well as looking at mapping Onyx and KBART and working with linked open data. We actually had a somewhat lively conversation about linked data and linked open data and trying to figure out how that could be incorporated into the Onyx PC metadata so that it could interact with BibFrame and other standards for cataloging. There is now much more detailed metadata within the Onyx PC standard, and so we are looking to enhance that further. There's also been an addition of information about open access in the pricing message, which when we first approached it was an interesting conversation because the pricing information always had a number in it. And when it was open access, you couldn't say it was 0 because that might mean something different. And so there was a whole vocabulary built up to enable discussing open access within this pricing message. Switching a little to Onyx for Books, this has been a very successful part of the editor framework. They have had continuing increased worldwide uptake of the Onyx for Books standard. And right now they're in version 3. Version 3 is going to be the basis of the future of all development. So their former version 2.1 and all of the code lists before code list 37 basically won't be enhanced any further. There has also been some interoperability with HTML and XHTML markup that they are working on, and as it says there is a paper on the website if you want to read more about that. They have acknowledged that there are many Onyx users who are still using version 2.1. And while they don't want to have a whole upheaval, they do have a very deliberate and planned sunsetting process, because that part of the standard isn't going to be enhanced, and version 2.1 users actually won't be able to use any of the future code lists until they convert. The third part of Editor is FEMA, and that I'm going to talk about anyway, is the FEMA work. And this is a subject classification that is actually slowly displacing several national classifications, as well as some of the better known classifications. And recently they met with their steering committee and have added a number of qualifiers to the messages, including geographic, educational, and time periods. One of the most interesting pieces to come out of that meeting was the announcement that Amazon Books has incorporated in their European storefronts the FEMA subject codes. And that was something that was a very exciting announcement. They're using that in their browse trees and are making sure that the FEMA subjects are available for use. And they've also had some improvements in their searching to work with both the English and the American spelling of common words. And then Tim gave me a whole list of contact info, although if you just go to editor.org, you can actually get to any of these spots for further research and information. How are we doing on time?
Okay. The printed program is different from the online program in terms of the time.
Okay.
So we could either break now. You have PyJ, the ISO 8.
I have the ISO 8 in here, and
Yeah, keep going.
keep going? Okay. All right. So switching gears now to ISO 8, a little bit more info about ISO and its committees. ISO started in 1946 with delegates from only 25 countries, and now there are 163 national standards bodies that are involved in ISO. There is only one member from each country, so that means 163 countries are involved. And in the US, the member body is ANSI, and just as another example, in the UK, the member body is BSI, which is the British Standards Institute. And as Todd mentioned earlier, NISO is the secretariat for one of the technical committees, or several?
One of the subcommittees.
one of the subcommittees of the technical committee. And so members are encouraged to participate in various committees that make sense for their organization. In order to participate, individuals who are interested can contact their national body to be selected or approved as experts. People can also be observers or actually get involved in working as conveners or other roles within the committee. So I pulled a couple of things off of ISO's site to just show the structure of the ISO committees. ISO is very much about structure and following rules and going through many different steps to get to where you need to go. The technical committees, which are at the bottom of this chart, are where most of the activity takes place, and each technical committee can have one or more subcommittees. And I think I actually mentioned this. Conveners, such as I am on ISO 8, are actually invited to serve. They have to be voted in, and then they basically lead the work of the experts on the working group, making sure that dates are met and consensus is used to reach the goal of the committee. And typically the publication term from the start of the working group till something is actually published is anywhere from 2 to 3 years. The ISO 8 is actually an international standard, but it is not required that the publication be a standard. If it's something that is a little bit less rigorous, you can create a technical report or a technical spec. And so there are variations in the rules and the requirements as to which publication deliverable you are working on. A typical timeline for NISO goes through potentially 6 stages. Some of them are not required, but you start with the proposal that gets voted on. If it's approved, you go through a preparatory stage, and that's usually the longest. ISO 8 has actually, you'll see on a later slide, been in the preparatory stage for quite some time. We are almost ready to go to the committee stage, which is where the working group actually gives the draft, really, of their work to their technical committee to review and to comment on and to edit as needed. And then it can go through an inquiry stage to approval and then publication. So ISO 8 itself actually started just as a recommendation in 1954. It then was felt that it needed to be a little bit more rigorous, and so in 1977 there was a revision and it became an ISO standard. But in 1977 there was not a whole lot of online work. So I know it's really hard to see, but if you look at the table of contents, this is really about the presentation of print periodicals, even though it didn't say that. But I guess nobody was envisioning digital periodicals at that time either. So there's a lot about layouts and running titles and the way an actual magazine or journal should look. Which leads us into the tied to PIJ. So when the revision was approved in 2015, part of the charge was that the working group should look at NISO's recommended practice, PIJ, in order to incorporate information that was relevant about the presentation of electronic journals. And so that's what we've been doing. Since our first meeting, May of last year, we have had delegates from 12 countries, which represent 24 different organizations, working on the revision. There are probably a core 8 to 10 people who have been really involved in the revision, and we've got probably a month left until we have to get to our next phase. So the first part we've done. We're now in that middle section where we're working towards our committee draft, which is hopefully going to be done by the end of June. And then there's some time in between where the committee will vote on, not vote, they'll send us corrections, and then we'll go to the draft international standard. At that point, the draft will go out to all of the ISO members, and they get to comment. They can just vote to approve it. They can ask questions. Depending on how many questions or comments there are, we can either go directly to publication or go through another revision cycle or two in order to get to our targeted publication date of January of 2019. And I think that is it for me. Are there any questions or comments, or do we want to go take a break?
I've got a question about PyJ and ISO 8.
Uh-huh.
So is the draft ISO 8 essentially PyJ all over again, or how have you put these things together?
So the way we actually started was to match sections where we could, and created sort of a mishmash of interwoven sections. Right. So yes, we did have a discussion as to whether the print part should be separate and then the electronic, or if we should really just interweave them based on the subject. So we decided to interweave them. There will be some very distinct similarities, but we're now going through and looking at some of the terminology, so some of that may change a little bit from PyJ to ISO 8. And then we'll see what the technical committee says once we get it to them.